Welcome. I hope you can hear us okay. We're going to join a screen for a little bit and then I'll try and hop over. And I'm Sarah from the Bay County Public Library. I'm really happy to have Willie Spears here to share about Hawk Massalina. And this is part of our summer programming. We have various events happening. Next Tuesday is a program with the Florida Public Archaeology Network. And that one is all about shipwrecks. So 2 of the shipwrecks that are going to be featured are local. So there's going to be the SS Tarpon, as well as one that sunk off the coast of like Port St. Joe mysteriously during World War II. So if you're interested, go to either our Bay County Public Library Facebook and find the event, and you'll have the link there, or give me an email, or it's on our website as well. I'm going to pass it on over to Willie, and I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm honored. Hi, Charity. Good to see you. Charity is a friend of mine from College Way in Oklahoma. She's a Nebraska Cornhusker fan, and we won't hold that against her. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm honored to be here. I reached out to Sarah with a public library. I didn't know it was Sarah. And I asked them would they like to purchase my book. This was months ago when my book was first published. And she said, we've already ordered your book. We have your book in the library already. So I was truly honored by that and excited that they had already purchased my book and they have it here in the public library. And so if you don't have a copy and you're local, go to your public library and just go look back in the day, I'm showing my age, we lived in the card catalog. Those days are over. Everything is not digital. So you can go get the book. So that's very exciting for me. I wrote the book with a guy named Willie Brown. I actually wrote the book. Willie Brown, he did the artwork in the book, did an excellent job. Willie is, I should have sent Willie a link to this, but Willie is an artist in Houston, Texas, lives in the 3rd Ward there. We played football together, arena football together in Boise, Idaho, many, many years ago. And so I'm just truly honored to be able to recognize my great-grandfather, Narcisco Hawk Massalina, in this way. And I'm excited that you joined us today. If you have any questions, I'm going to read most of the book. It's a short book. It has a lot of history in it. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Sarah is going to be in charge of the chat. Hawk had 8 children. The last 3 were girls, Mildred, Mary Bell, and Mary Hallen. And Mary Hallen, or Helen, it was I'm sorry, not Mary Helen, but Helen, her daughter's Mary Helen. Helen was my grandmother. Helen was 90 years old when she passed away. She was the youngest child of Hawk Massalina, and she had 11 children, 11 children. One of those 11 was my father, Willie Spears Sr., and he had 1 child. You know, when you do it right the first time, you don't have to have any more children. So I'm so excited to be a part of this great lineage. This is the book. This is the book right here. All right, this is the book. And so I'm gonna read a little bit of it to you. First, I wanna give you some highlights about Hawk. This is unbelievable information. Listen to me, listen to me. The guy, Jonathan Goldsmith, he used to be in those Saki commercials, the beer commercials. He would say these interesting things. He'd say, the most interesting man in the world, okay? No disrespect to that guy, but my great-grandfather was the most interesting man in the world. Understand, listen to these statistics of interest. Listen, this proves he's the most interesting man in the world. Check this out. He lived to be 107 years old. Come on now. He was a member of the Union and the Confederate armies in the Civil War. He was a member of both sides. That's like being a fan of Alabama and Auburn, or Florida State and Florida, or the Steelers and the Cowboys. And you can't be both. You got to make a decision. You got to make a try. Tell my wife, you got to like NCIS or you got to like Law and Order. You can't be flipping back and forth on the channels. Make a decision. So this guy was a member of the Union and the Confederate Army. Isn't that amazing? Check this out. He was married 50 years. Come on. 50 years. He was married for 50 years and he had no children. He was married 50 years, he had no children. You're probably saying, well, if he had no children, how are you sitting there right now? I don't understand. He was married to a woman named Ha Bell. They were married for 50 years and no children was born of this union. After they were married for 50 years, he married a girl named Mary Bell Smith. He actually purchased her. He went to Camilton, Florida, where he sold fish often, and he married a girl in her 20s. Yeah, in her 20s. He was in his 70s. She was in her 20s. I'm gonna let you think on that for a minute. She was in her 20s. He was in his 70s. Isn't that amazing? So if you're 70 years old out there, there's hope for you, brother. You need to go to what's that? Match.com. And I'm telling you, no, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. But Hawk Massalina was in his 70s, and he married a young lady in her 20s. His first wife, he traveled by horseback. Some historians say he went all the way to Virginia to get her. His second wife, he went to Campbellton, Florida, which is about 45 minutes from Redfish Point. And we'll talk more about that later. He fathered 8 children after the age of 72. Come on, man. 8 children after the age of 72. By definition, he was a stud. By definition, he was a stud. Look up stud in the dictionary. You'll see Hawk Massalina. He was a free black man in the 1800s. He was never a slave. He lived in the 1800s and was never a slave. Neither were his father, Jose, who lived to be 112 years old. He worked as a guide, a fisherman, and a carpenter, and a boat builder, amongst other things. He survived the Civil War and a major hurricane. He was married to 2 women named Belle. See, they both named were Belle, High Belle and Mary Belle. See, that's smart, so you don't mess up and call the wrong name. The worst thing you could do is call the girl the wrong name. Like, she'll never forget that. She may say it's not a big deal. She will never forget if you call her the wrong name. So Hawk was so smart, he married 2 women with the same name. He just called them Belle. I love Belle. Belle was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I'm thankful that Belle was in my life. Who's he talking about? Only he knows. He has a bayou, street, housing development, a daycare center, and a drink named after him. Now, this part I'm kind of embarrassed to admit. Very embarrassed to admit this. Housing project was named after Hawk Massalina. I actually found the articles that was written about this years ago. A friend of mine, Kim Graham, has this database. She's a publisher of a newspaper. She can go find old articles. And I found the article when they first named the housing project after Hawk Massalina. The other half was named after a Caucasian or white gentleman for the white citizens. And then there was half named after Hawk Massalina. And then the whole housing project ended up being called the Massalina Projects. It's been torn down because of Hurricane Michael, and it's being rebuilt right now in the same location over in Glenwood here in Panama City. So I tell you that to say our family should be proud of that. I'm embarrassed to admit this to you. There's a street named after him. There's a bayou named after him. There's a daycare center. I'm embarrassed to admit this to you. Our family was most excited when a drink was named after him. Not the bayou, not the housing development, not the child center. No. We were most excited when a drink was named. I had relatives from New York, from Newark, New Jersey, from Miami. I heard they named a drink after Grandpa. I heard they named a drink after Uncle Hawk. Can you send it to me? I can't send a drink in the mail. We were so honored when the History Brewing Company, downtown Panama City, they named a drink, a citrus alcoholic beverage called the Hawk Sipper after Hawk Massalina. They've done a great job of recognizing his legacy, and we're greatly appreciative as a family. Now, here's another interesting fact. Hawk would throw the wildest parties on Saturday night, and then on Sunday morning, he preached the gospel. Yeah, same guy. Could you imagine DJing at the party and the next morning saying, I invite you to turn in your Bibles to John chapter 3, verse 16. And you look good dancing last night, Betty Sue. I see you, girl. Okay, back to, can you imagine this guy? He was a Renaissance man. Listen, he turned down the opportunity or help from his mother-in-law. She wanted to raise the girls. She said, Hawk, you're getting older. Let me take the girls and you raise the 5 boys. Hawk, in his 90s, said, no, I'm going to raise all my children myself. Unbelievable man. Okay, here we go. Who was Hawk Massalina? The reason I wrote the book is because we did a bad job as a family of documenting the history of our family. I used to tell my grandmother all the time, Grandma, I'm going to record you talking about your famous father. And I never did. Now, granted, we didn't have cell phones like we do today, where it would be easy to record, but I had planned to get the video equipment from Rutherford High School. Sarah's a Rutherford graduate, so is her sister, as always. Go Rams. I was excited about going to Miss Beverly Frazier and asking her, can I get her camcorder and can I bring it to my grandmother's house and record her? But I dropped the ball. I never did. So I want to encourage you. You need to write a book. I believe we all have a book inside of us. If you drive by the graveyard, you see, of course, the tombstones and the graves, but you also see books that were not written, memories that we can't get back, stories that will never be told. So I want to encourage you to write a book. It's not very difficult. If I can do it, you definitely can do it. Who was Hawk Massalina? Now, when I read this to elementary schools, if you look in the book, there's a side, I just read this side. When I read to like pre-K and first grade, second grade, and then when I'm reading to adults, I read the entirety of the book. So I'll be reading all that to you guys today. Who was Hawk Massalina? Interrupt me at any time with any questions. He was a son. A son starts out as a little boy. Hawk was born Narcisco Crispina Massalina on April 15, 1840. To Jose Massalina and his wife, a South Carolina slave. All right, so she came from South Carolina. Some historians say near the Virginia area, but they traced it back to South Carolina. Hawk was one of 8 children. 4 of his known siblings were Crispina, Spinoza, Joseph, and Betsy. Okay, his father Jose was a Spanish free black man who made his way to St. Joseph as a stowaway on a merchant ship. Jose traveled across the peninsula and settled at Redfish Point and made it his home. Redfish Point is located near Panama City, Florida. The current location is part of Tyndall Air Force Base. His father, Jose, traveled to Georgia and invited close to 40 families to join him in North Florida. In 1832, they constructed a school, a church, as well as individual homes. Jose was wealthy, but lost it all in the hurricane of 1856. Jose lived to be 112 years old, and Hawk lived to be 107. Now, this hurricane, back then, they didn't give hurricanes names. So it was just called the Hurricane of 1856. This hurricane was a category 5 in today's terms. Of course, there were no building codes for buildings. It tore everything up. It was so bad, and we'll get to that, that Jose thought about selling his family into slavery just so they could survive. I also want to point out to you that Florida was a Spanish property, all right? It was not owned by the United States. So everyone that lived in Florida was free. Right across the border in Georgia, those citizens were slaves. So Jose went and found 40 slave families and said, follow me and you will become free because we're in a free territory. So that did a lot for their self-esteem, for their morale. And a lot of those families are still here in Panama City to this day. Some of those are the Gaynor family, and there's so many more. When Jose died in 1902, he was buried at Tyndall Field. Hawk died in 1948 and was buried at Redwood Cemetery in Panama City, Florida. Who was Hawk Massalina? He was a husband. A husband is a married man. All right. Hawk was married twice. He traveled to Virginia by horseback in 1861 to purchase a wife whose name was Bell, a woman who was half Cherokee Indian. So really, somebody may say, Willie Spears, you look like you're African-American. Well, I've never been to Africa, but I mixed with a lot of things. On my mother's side, her great-great-grandmother was full Native American. On my father's side, as you can see right here, Jose's wife was Cherokee Indian. Jose was Spanish, okay? Hawk Massalina was a mixture of Spanish and Cherokee Indian. So I have a lot in my blood system. But one thing I do know, I know my real race. I'm a member of the human race, and that's the most important race. He was married twice, as I said before. Hawk and his wife, Bell, lived together as man and wife for 50 years until her death. No children was born in this union. Bell died January 25th, 1911, and was buried at Redfish Point Cemetery with a headstone bearing her name. That headstone is still there on the government-owned property near Tyndall Air Force Base, Panama City, Florida. You can go right now. Sarah, you can't go right now because I need you to stay in this room, make sure the Zoom works. But you can go right now to Tyndall Air Force Base and see the tombstone of Bell. It's the only one still there. It's unbelievable that that marker is still there after all these years. After he lost his wife, Hawk married Mary Bell Smith, a resident of Campbellton, Florida. Hawk made several trips to the area to sell salted fish that he had caught. During these trips, he became friends with Mary Smith. The couple had 8 children. Hawk was over 70 years old, and Mary Smith was in her 20s when they started having children on the bay. Mary was an excellent homemaker for their home on Davis Point. So they started on Redfish Point, but as the families grew, they moved to Davis Point. And I'm so blessed. I've been to both of those places. My friend Nancy took me on her boat on the bay, and we went over there to visit a few months ago. Mary was an excellent homemaker for the home on Davis Point, but she also washed other families' laundry that Hawk would bring from Panama City. Mary died at the age of 36. So I want you to imagine this. If you've ever been to Panama City, or if you're a local listening to this, and you're driving down what we call Beach Drive, okay? The beautiful homes are on your right. On your left is the bay. Back then, we're gonna get to this in a minute, a man named George Mortimer West had a vision that that would be the beach. What we know as Panama City Beach now. That would be the beach. At the time, the Hathaway Bridge wasn't built. No one thought land on Panama City Beach was valuable because you couldn't grow crops in it. It was all this sandy. Whoever thought someone would pay extra money to live somewhere where you can look at the water, not grow crops, not have industry, but just look at the water. In the 1800s, no one knew that would be a thing. So imagine Hawk Massalina on the other side of that bay. Beach Drive, beautiful homes, the bay. Coming over on a boat to give fish to his friend who lived on Beach Drive. Now we're going to get to George in a little bit, but George's home is still there. That's what I love about this history. We can still put our hands on it. And his children, his son, his great-great-grandson actually lives in that home right now. And me and George Mortimer George West, me and his daughter, his great-great-granddaughter, went fishing the other day. So just like Hawk and George went fishing in the 1800s, me and Margaret, we went fishing. They're direct descendants in the 2021. So it was really, really cool. So I tell you that to let you know that it wasn't very far. There weren't a lot of roads in the 1800s here in Panama City. So Hawk did everything by boat. His boys would row boats. He actually taught them to row the boat this way because he said you would go faster that way. So I believe he was a coach as well. Who was Hawk Massalina? Remember, if you have any questions, ask away. Hawk Massalina was a father. A father is a man who has children or has a child. In 1912, at the age of 72, Hawk married his second wife, the former Mary Belle Smith of Campbellton, Florida. He met Mary during his excursions in Jackson County as a saltfish trader. Hawk and Mary had 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls. Now, all of the boys passed away before the age of 65. The girls all lived to be 90. There's a man named Ivy Birch. He has published documents right here in this library. Ivy Birch, a longtime educator here in Bay County. He's 93 years old. He's alive right now. He actually did a Zoom call with our family on May 20th. We'll talk about that a little later. But Ivy Birch told me that the boys were allowed to do whatever they want. They could hang out all night, they could party, they could drink, they could smoke, whatever they wanted to do, as long as they got their work done. The girls were not allowed to leave the porch. They couldn't go anywhere. So they would stay at home with their mother all day and clean linen. Now, the Massalina family had the first that I've ever heard of from my research, the first one-day turnaround on laundry. They would get the laundry from what they call the town, Panama City, and they would bring it over in boats, the dirty laundry. The boys would bring it over to the women. The women, if it was not a rainy day, the women would wash the laundry and hang it out and be able to get the laundry back to the people in the same day. Other people on Redfish Point did laundry, but no one could turn around that fast, probably because they didn't have 8 children and 3 women who weren't allowed to leave the porch. And I think that Mr. Birch believes that helped them live a long time. These children, Jerry, Frank Sr., Rudolph, Linba, LJ Sr., and 3 girls, Mary Belle, Mildred, and Helen. Now, many of you local people know my cousin. His name is Lynn Massalina. His real name is Linba Massalina, after his great-grandfather. After his grandfather, Linba, who was one of the sons of Hawk Massalina. And his dad's name is Lynn as well. Rudolph was often called Rudy, from what my dad told me. I actually met Uncle LJ, I met Uncle Frank, and I met Uncle Jerry, and of course, I met all the girls because they all lived to be 90. I remember I took a trip. My Aunt Mildred called me and said, can you take me and your grandmother to Campbellton to a funeral? I remember having a Nokia phone. I probably was in my 20s. I wasn't married yet. And we drove from Panama City to this funeral in Campbellton, Florida. Remember, Mary Bell Smith, their mother from Campbellton. They knew this man that had died. They were probably in their mid 80s. I was trying to be very serious and focused. You have two elderly people in the car. I didn't want to drive too fast. I didn't want to text and drive. I put my phone away. I'm driving along. We get there. They're inside the funeral. I didn't go to the funeral. I stayed in the car, playing on my phone. They come out. I was on the phone with my friend. I said, hey, man, I got to act sad. I got to act sad. I got to go. I got to go. I got to go. I get off the phone. I sit there, sullen, serious. They get in the car laughing and joking. They say, you remember that used to be a joke? Yeah, that hole in the wall. We used to come down here and party. That used to be a joke. I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Did Hawk know about this party y'all used to do? Then they started commenting on how good the preacher smelled. They started commenting. My Aunt Mildred said, hell, that preacher know he smelled good. I don't know what kind of cologne he had on. Then they asked me to pop the trunk. They had taken 2 flowers from the funeral. So if you're on this call, or you're watching this later on YouTube, and you're a police officer in Jackson County, Campbellton, I am not an accomplice to those stolen plants from that funeral. I was just doing what I was told to do. I don't want any problems. I don't want any beef. Listen, I'm a nice guy. I was just doing what I was told to do. Please do not arrest me. They got in the car, they were laughing and joking, but that was a great memory for me to be with 2 of Hawk Massalina's children. Mary Bell, we called her Annie, and Mildred, we call Aunt Mildred and Helen. They all lived in Glenwood in my lifetime, about 2 or 3 streets apart from each other. And it was a beautiful thing. My grandmother lived on MacArthur right off of 8th Court. Her father, Hawk Massalina, died on 8th Court. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The boys worked hard with their father, planning, building, fixing, and discovering. His sons also drove boats around the bayou as it was the fastest mode of transportation for the time. Hawk was strict, especially when it came to the girls. He was a rigorous disciplinarian. He also demanded church and public school attendance, despite the fact that 6th graders and above had to purchase their own books. He had a strong work ethic, and doing chores well was important to him. All 8 children have passed away, but their legacy lives through their children and their grandchildren. Who was Hawk Massalina? He was a soldier. A soldier is a person who serves in the military. When he was 23 years old, Hawk found himself fighting in the American Civil War for the Union made up of northern states and the Confederacy made up of southern states. The Civil War took place in the United States from 1861 to 1865, fought between northern states loyal to the Union and southern states that seceded to form the Confederate States of America. The Civil War was a result of enslavement of Black people. Hawk believed all Black people should be free and considered it an honor to fight for his belief. Initially, he joined the Northern Forces in 1863 to support the Union cause. He had a medical exam and was issued a cutlass pistol, blue uniform, and a pancake hat. He was stationed aboard the U.S. bark Roebuck and later the U.S. Restless. While in the military, Hawk served as an attendant for the cottages, a guide, a cannon cleaner, and a gun cleaner. Now, on St. Andrews Bay, as we know it now, where the big shrimp boat is, if you live in Panama City, near Uncle Ernie's, in that area, there was a huge, if you would call it now, a condominium. It's still one over there in the back now. Well, that needed to be protected, and that was one of Hawk's jobs. He later joined the Confederate soldiers as a guide toward the end of the war in 1865. Hawk received the letter of recognition from the Union and the Confederacy for fighting in the Civil War. What was great about doing this research is it's easy to find documentations about the Civil War. You can Google right now, you can Google Narcisco Massalina, U.S. Civil War, or the war between the states. And all of these documents come up from the Congress and from the U.S. government. They've done a great job of documenting the history of the Civil War. They can tell you where wars were fought, how many people died on each day. Remember, the Civil War didn't last a long time. It was only a few years, and they've done a great job of that research. He was a preacher. A preacher is someone who talks to people in church. In 1863, Hawk's father, Jose, known to some as Josie or Joe, because they thought Jose was Josie or Joe, was a Spanish merchant marine who jumped ship in Port St. Joe and made his way to Panama City, Florida, where he established a community from scratch. This community included housing, school, and church. New Judson Missionary Baptist Church, where my father is a deacon right now, was established in 1877, adjacent to the Redfish Point Cemetery. The church's founder was Jose, Hawk, Thomas Winslip, Primus Gaynor, and Starling Gaynor. At the time, this was the only church for blacks in the area. The closest church for African Americans or black people at the time was in Chipley, Florida. Which like now it doesn't seem that long because that's about a 45-minute to hour drive. But back then that was a long distance. So the only church was New Judson Missionary Baptist Church. At the time, this was the only church. The church was also used as a school. In 1941, the federal government forced the families to leave Redfish Point and Davis Point to build a military base on the property. The question is often asked, did the family receive any money? The answer is no. There's a gentleman at Florida State University, Panama City campus right now. His last name is difficult to say, and I don't want to butcher it, so we'll call him Dr. Robert. His first name is Robert, and he has a doctorate degree. All right, he's doing a lot of research on this to try to help families out. I think it's admirable what he's doing, but what's most fascinating to me is the things he's learning on his journey. Hawk and his family moved to Panama City. Now, if you've ever been to Panama City, or if you're local, go down Business 98, where Speedy Car Wash used to be on the right before the storm. Now there's like a waffle shop there that they have breakfast. There's a liquor store there on the right. I'm talking 1 block away from CVS, and you're going toward the beach, so you're going west. You keep going, the dollar store, Family Dollar, is on your left. There used to be a place called Big Mama's House, a restaurant there on the left. That's where the family was pushed, if you will. The family was told to settle there in what people locals call East End, is what they called it. Now, where the rescue mission was, if you go east a little bit that way, there's a road called Massalina Drive. It's only about a mile long, and there's a few shotgun houses still there. That's where the families were dumped, for lack of a better word. They were told to leave their land, and they put them there, and the government helped them build some houses and things of that nature, but they did not give them any monetary, anything of monetary value. So they built those houses. They weren't allowed to sell the house. They had to live in the houses, and they helped them build a church. So when I say they helped them, they gave some materials to build the church. The church that they built is still there. I was in the church the other day, helping my dad rip up tiles in the fellowship hall because the storm didn't destroy the church, but did some damage to the church. Okay, and we're talking about Hurricane Michael. All right, Hawk and his family moved to Panama City. New Judson Missionary Baptist Church was moved to 717 East 7th Court on July 7th, 1941. Hawk was one of the original preachers who used the Bible to encourage the citizens of Redfish Point on Sundays. Hawk spent his last days 2 blocks away from New Judson Missionary Baptist Church in his son's house located at 902 East 8th Court. The church I grew up in was located down the street at 802 East 8th Court, and that church is no longer there. Hawk was an engineer. Now, then I tell you the most interesting man in the world. An engineer is a person who designs or builds a structure. In his day, an engineer was a person who designed and built things with their mind and with their hands. Hawk learned the carpentry business from his father, Jose, who built and designed boats, houses, churches, and other structures. Hawk and his father worked very hard, but were never slaves. However, after the hurricane of 1865, Jose considered selling his family into slavery. The Massalina family lost everything in the storm, making landfall in August 31st, 1856. You can Google this hurricane. Google a hurricane hits Florida, August 31st, 1856. It was a Category 2 storm at the time, would be equivalent to a Category 5 now. The family found high ground and waited out the 12-hour hurricane. Sound very similar to Hurricane Michael. This was the only time Hawk's family considered slavery as a better option for his family. Now you may ask, why would they consider slavery? We have to think about it. If you're a slave, although you're not free, food is provided, clothing is provided. A lot of people don't realize when a lot of comedians joke about African-American churches and traditional white churches and their difference. The biggest difference is how long they're in service. Well, a lot of that has to do with back then, the only day that the slaves were free was on Sunday. On Sunday, this slave was not a slave. He may have been a minister, a person of high regard. She may have been a missionary. They may have been an usher. They may have been a deacon. They may have been a trustee. So they had a title. They had prestige. They had status. They were able to dress up. So why go to church for 1 hour when the master says you can stay in church as long as you want, but stay in the church? So they would go to church all day long, and then they would eat at church because they did not want to go back to their reality. And their reality, of course, was being enslaved. And so I think, a lot of people don't realize the history behind the longevity of a lot of traditional Black churches, but it has a lot to do with that day of freedom, if you will. Since arriving in 1832, he had always been free because of a treaty. In 1821, the treaty for Florida's purchase between the United States and Spain was written with a stipulation stating all free Blacks in Florida would be treated as free citizens. So in other words, when America bought Florida from Spain, they had an agreement that we're not going to enslave your citizens. They're already free. We're going to keep them free. It goes on to say, Hawk's family fell into this category. This freedom allowed the Massalina family to earn wages for several jobs, including working as an engineer. Man, Hawk was an interesting man. He was a fisherman. A fisherman is a person who catches fish. Hawk and his family were among the first to settle at Redfish Point. Redfish Point is named for the large population of redfish, red snapper, and grouper caught there. The best fisherman on the bayou was Hawk. His name came from his ability to see fish in the water that no one else could see. They said he has eyes like a hawk. Hawk would see fish in the water and tell the explorers, hey, there's a fish right there. They said, no, it's not. There's a fish right there. I don't see it. Trust me. Get your spear, stabbed in the water, you'll have a fish. They would do it and say, wow, you were right. Man, you got eyes like a hawk. He served as a guide, taking visitors on 3-day fishing or hunting trips for $4 per outing. Think about this now. He charged people $4 per outing. So if he had 10 people, that's $40. In the 1800s, he had some money. Most people would not go fishing at night because they didn't catch many fish. Hawk would go out at night and come in at sunrise with a boat filled of fish. He taught people how to fish for mackerel at night. Hawk did not mind sharing his knowledge, but once people learned, they kept it to themselves. So Hawk would share his secrets with everybody. Like his great-grandson, he loved to talk. But what happened is people would want to keep that information to themselves, not Hawk. He wanted to tell everybody how they can better themselves. He would catch up to 18,000 pounds of fish off Hog Island and sell them for 3 cents a pound in the month of March. From September to November, schools of fish could be found in the Gulf and the Bay. These fish were mostly mackerel in the spring and mullet in the fall. Unbelievable man. Charge people to take them out and then catch fish with them and then sell the fish. More money, more money, more money. I see you, Hawk. This is my favorite part of the book. Hawk was a friend. A friend is a person who you know and have a bond with. One of Hawk's best friends was George Mortimer West, the founding father of Panama City. George came to Panama City in 1887 to escape the brutal winters of the North. Upon arrival, he almost immediately connected with Hawk. They had several things in common. Like Hawk, George was productive and industrious. Both of them were widowers at some point and remarried. Both pioneers who built a school, and both were openly against racism. George was a taxidermist, a railroad worker, a botanist, a writer, a promoter, a publisher, a horticulturist, and an attorney. He was whatever the community needed him to be. And the same could be said of his good friend Hawk. George and Hawk would fish and hunt together, but they really got to know each other when George interviewed Hawk for the newspaper. George started several businesses in Panama City, including the first daily newspaper. He saw great economic potential for the area in connecting the railroads of the Midwest to Panama City and developing a port for international shipping. George moved to St. Andrews permanently in 1905, operating several businesses until he died in 1926. So he died about 22 years before Hawk died. But they were really good friends. One thing that was so interesting in my research, and Nancy wrote a great book about about George Mortimer West. George kept a diary, and the actual original diary was housed in this library. It's just unbelievable. Rich history, like a real diary, like his handwriting in pencil. It's so authentic that in her book, when she transcribed it, some of them is just empty spaces because she couldn't read his writing or it had faded away. She also found glass slides of actual people who lived on Redfish Point. Just unbelievable history. Well, in the book, he mentions Hawk's name 19 times in his diary. Hawk and I killed a pelican today. Hawk and I ate breakfast. Hawk brought me some more fish. I'm meeting with Hawk today to talk about these crooked politicians. There was a sheriff in town that was crooked, and the Ku Klux Klan was going to bomb the newspaper because George was a Yankee. He was a Northerner. He was not, no one wanted him here. And George was not on any side. He was nonpartisan. He didn't care about anything except the facts. So he was writing things in the paper that made people upset. He and Hawk would meet about those issues, and they would have each other's back because they knew some people in town did not want them to do anything positive when it came to mixing the races. Unbelievable history. Amazing. Okay. Who was Hawk? Hawk was a human being. A human being is a man, a woman, or child, not an animal. We are all different, but we're all human. Hawk may have been one of the most interesting human beings to ever live. And I read all those things to you earlier that I called the highlight reel of Hawk Massalina. Hawk's personality was captivating. He was one of the community's best loved and most well-known citizens. He was a great storyteller and would often tell stories to groups of people at Redfish Point. You gotta remember, there was no Netflix. So I don't know if Sarah would have made it. There was no Netflix back then. So there was no, you couldn't go to the movie theater back then. There was no iPhones. So entertainment was sitting around listening to Hawk tell stories. He was a great storyteller, would often tell stories at Redfish Point. He and his wife were considered colorful characters. Some of the journalists, that's what they wrote. I found 3 different journalists, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Montgomery Advertiser, and a newspaper from North Carolina who came down here to interview Hawk when he turned 100 years old, and they all described him differently, but almost all of them used the words colorful characters. Around 1866, the bayou in Panama City was officially named Massalina Bayou after Jose, not Hawk. Years later, a street, a daycare center, and a housing development also bear the name Massalina. Now, the Massalina in the book that I wrote is spelled M-A-S-S-L-I-N-A. That's the Anglo-Saxon way of spelling Massalina. The way my cousin spelled it, L-I-E-N-O, Massalino, is the correct way or the original way that it's spelled. And that was changed over the years. There's actually several spellings. My cousin, her name is Renee. She lives in the DC area. She did a great job of looking up and finding census reports from back then. And the censuses were handwritten and they all spelled it differently. Massalino, Massalina, some spelled it Massaline. So it was pretty interesting. In the fall of 2020, History Class Brewing Company named a beer after Hawk, Hawk Sipper Pale Ale. They also have a massive mural of Hawk on the wall. Hawk's grandson, Limba, fought hard to keep the Massalina name attached to the housing development early in 2020. His efforts proved to be successful. Bonita Underground, a local band, wrote a song about Hawk called Massalina. It's really good. You got to go check it out on YouTube. All right, we almost finished, guys. Almost finished. Who was Hawk Massalina? He was the life of the party, baby. Hawk Massalina was the life of the party. That's right. Hawk Massalina was a party animal. He was the life of the party. The life of the party is a person who is outgoing personality, who enjoys social setting. In 1940, journalists from Atlanta, Georgia, Montgomery, Alabama, they made their way to Redfish Point to interview Hawk for his 100th birthday. They knew he was a fascinating man who would do a great interview because of his wit, sense of humor, and excellent memory. One reporter asked Hawk how far back he could remember. He responded by saying, back to 3 weeks before I was born. Really, Hawk? You can remember back 3 weeks before you were born? He was quoted as saying, life on the bay was so hard, it took all a man could do working 6 days a week, preaching on Sunday, and stealing chickens at night to make an honest living. That's Hawk. He always had something funny to say. When describing the early years of his life, he said, the moon was no bigger than a quarter, and the entrance to Massalina Bayou was so narrow, I could step over it. The bay was only a mud puddle, and the Gulf was a bubbling spring. Now, if you know the area, you realize how funny that is. In his later years, Hawk hosted Emancipation Day, and he celebrated that on Redfish Point for Emancipation Proclamation that happened in 1863, which is very similar to what had just been called into order to be celebrated, the Juneteenth holiday. Very similar, okay? This was held on May 20th each year to celebrate the freedom of the slaves. He also hosted parties at his house on Saturday nights, but nothing compared to the Emancipation Day that was celebrated every year. So my family, thanks to my cousin Renee, she said, we're gonna celebrate it as a family. And I appreciate that. So May 20th this past year, we were all on Zoom, our family, Massalina descendants, celebrating Emancipation Proclamation Day. Also, we're gonna be doing that every year, hopefully next year in person. All right. Now, if you have any questions, you want to answer it. But first, I want to show you my friend Willie Brown from Houston, Texas. He did the artwork. Thank you so much, Willie. And this is me. I'm the one talking to you right now. All right. Any questions?
Right now, it looks like we just have comments, but yes, please add questions to the chat box. Renee is going to be coming in July, so she might be visiting the library. Yeah, I think if you wanted to see George West's journals, it's in the local history room. So if we have advance, we might even be able to note what pages or which ones they're out of. Nancy might be able to help as well because she studied them very detailed and would know which journals would have what information. And I know we have some images in our digital collection of Hawk Massalina from, was it a Pioneer Day or it was from the 40s. I should have researched before the presentation, but you can research, if you go into our catalog and put Hawk Massalina, it'll pull up any items with Hawk Massalina in there, including the non-projected images, which you can change the format to, and that would be our digital collection. The images will start out small, but if you go to the second page, it'll have a click and see enlarged, and then you can see it where it's a bigger picture. Okay, we have a question from Patrick. Was there a large community of Black folk here in the 1800s, free Black folk?
Yes. Yes, there were, Patrick, great question. What happened was Jose, in the 1830s, we went to Georgia and he got those families. He brought those 40 families, roughly 40 families back. And of course, those started having children. So it started in the 1830s, went all the way to 1841 when they actually leased the property. And so those free Blacks were here. And at the time they came, Florida was owned by Spain. It was Spanish property or Spanish territory. And because of that, they were free. When the treaty was signed, when America purchased the state of Florida, there was an agreement that those African Americans or those Blacks would still remain free. So there were several free Black people in the state of Florida, in North Florida, in this area, especially in the 1800s.
Hi, Elise.
Hi, excellent program, Willie. Thank you for sharing your family legacy and all the contributions of your family.
Thank you so much, Elise. That means a lot. I hope you have a copy of the book, but it's truly my honor.
I don't know how many other people are on. Are there a lot of people, Sarah?
There's still a few people on.
Are you going to do anything about Juneteenth? I know Willie mentioned it. I went there Saturday when they moved it to the gym, and I was so disappointed that I was only like 4 white people there. And when Hawk, Willie, when you were mentioning about, I couldn't hear that well, the other man, the white man from the North who wrote letters to the editor. Well, I write a lot of them. So can you comment on how things were back in Hawk's days to how things are now?
Yes, ma'am. You were speaking of the Juneteenth celebration that they had with the minority PC group that was moved to Rosenwald because of the rain. It was
Right.
originally scheduled to be the Springfield Community Center and football field, youth field, I believe. I think a lot of it has to do with not getting the word out to every demographic. And the other part may be the weather that may have, steered some people from going one way or the other. But Hawk, one thing I learned from talking with Nancy is that Hawk and George joined forces to make sure that they were not going to tolerate any type of racism. And that was just amazing for me to hear. She had the actual documentation from the diary, the actual journal that he kept. Sarah knows a lot about that journal more than I do. So from her readings, she was able to realize that George was not used to segregation because he came from the North. He was foreign to him. He didn't understand why Black people had to drink at this fountain and white people at that fountain, but that was the norm. I think sometimes we label people who grew up back then with an evil or unbiblical label as a segregationist or racist. But that's just how things were. That was the norm. You weren't choosing a category to be in. You were born into a category and thus treated that way because of the way you look. Hawk and George were way ahead of their time. Before the marches, before civil rights movement, these two men, one Black, one white, became best buddies. And they decided they were not going to tolerate any injustice based on race. And so this documented is not my opinion. Nancy can tell you the same thing. So it was interesting to me because when I sought to write the book, I didn't know much about George. And then there was a woman, her name's Heather. She does these library pop-ups, I believe, every Monday. And one day she did one and she was talking about Nancy's book. I didn't know who Nancy was, but I thought the Heather lady was very interesting. So I'm watching her and she says Hawk Massalina. So my ears perk up. I said, what? I have to get this book. And so when I got the book, I read about it. And so to answer your question, Mr. Elise, they were ahead of the curve. I think we have to be careful when we say if a white person doesn't show up to a quote unquote historical Black event, that they're against it or they're part of the problem. There's a lot of factors. Sometimes everyone doesn't feel comfortable in every type of setting, or they may not feel that they were invited. But I think it's all of our jobs to do a better job of making sure we come together. We may have different issues, we have different backgrounds, but like I said in the beginning of this, we're all a member of the human race. And so I like to say we're all on the same team.
I don't know if you can see me. I have a thumbs up. So
awesome.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, we don't have your video on for this one.
But excellent. And thank you, Sarah. I enjoy everything that you're doing, and I look forward to all the other programs. And thanks again, Willie.
Thank you, Elise,
Thank you so much, Ms.
And I wanted to note that the book on George Mortimer West is available in the library as well. It's called George Mortimer West, His Path and History by Nancy Hudson. So if anyone's looking for that, because then they would also be able to get more of Hawk Massalina's history in that as well. I know that Renee wanted to chat, but then she's been doing the Q&A. Renee, would you like, your hand is raised. I'm gonna try and, Willie, you might have to see if you can make it to where Renee can talk.
What's up, cuz?
I'm here. Hi, everybody. Cousin, thank you so much for presenting this today. I'm happy that I was able to sign on. Aunt Brenda texted me and said, something's going on. You got to chime in and see what's happening. So I'm glad that I was able to jump on at the very last minute. I missed the beginning portion, but I am coming to Panama City, and I would like to check out the library and see some of the information that I was not able to research. As Willie mentioned, there were several books that mentioned our great-great-grandfather, and I was able to read Nancy's book. I read Madeline's book. I think she wrote 2 books that mentions our great-grandfather. So I am just so happy about the legacy and the history that's so rich in Panama City. And I'm here in New Jersey, and I share it with everybody I know. As our cousin mentioned, that we did have a Zoom on May 20th, and he was a part of that. I was a part of that. Mr. Ivy Birch was a part of that. So we are just super proud of the legacy that's left for us. Cousin, keep doing your thing. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you so much. Real quick, Renee, tell everybody about how when your father passed, you were so interested in history and how, I mean, she actually, Sarah, she texted me and said, we need to write a book. And I had just sent the book to the editor. I said, I already did, but a lot of the information she found is actually in the book. So just really quick, tell us your interest on the history and how you were so passionate about finding as much information out as you could. Maybe she went off.
Nope, I'm here. Was I still? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was done. I'm sorry. I'm
Did
here.
you have a question?
I didn't have a question. I was just.
Did you hear my question to you?
Wait, what was your question? Cause I'm sorry.
I want you to tell people about when after your father passed. I remember I drove my dad to Eric's house.
So
they went to the funeral. About your passion to find out more history after the passing of your father.
Yes, I got it. So what happened was my father had just passed last March. He passed actually, I'm sorry, in February, end of February, a few days before my mom's birthday, and it just triggered me to want to find out more about my family. Like we've always lived in New Jersey. I'm the only one from my family. My father has 4 children that was born in Panama on Tyndall and did not know anything about it. I would go visit every year, go visit my family, my grandma and my cousins, but I didn't know any of the history that we have. You know, I would drive by, my mom would share with me that there's names of our great-grandfathers, names on the buildings and the streets, and it just never triggered me until my father passed. That I need to learn about that history. So I began to research, and there's a book out there called Glimpses, Panhandle of the Past, and it just tells so much information. And I just tell you, every time I read about our great-grandfather, I just want to cry because it's so beautiful. And reading about Mr. West and his friendship with our grandfather, that was the first thing I read. When I read that book, I said, oh my God, they were friends. Back in the 1800s, a Black man, a white man were actually friends. And it just touched my heart so much. So yes, I was so passionate about it. And everything that I learned, I do put inside of our family group. We do have a family group that I share all the information. So I don't think it's robbery for me to share with everybody the things that I learned, because just like I had a passion to learn about it, I'm sure they do as well and didn't know where to start. So I'm glad that we both have put some information out there for our family to utilize, and their children and their children and their children. So I love you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I talked about Mildred. Mildred is her grandmother.
Nope, Mary Bell. Mary Bell,
I'm sorry, Mary Bell. Mary Bell had a son named Howard. Howard's her father.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes, we're the first, and the first.
Right.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going on
I'm gonna tell
mute.
you, thanks so much, Renee. But Renee's been so supportive. And then her aunt, Howard's sister, Sharon, so supportive, like so excited about the book. And we just have a rich history, and it's so good to know and learn even more. And so I'm excited Renee's coming down here in July.
But thank you everyone for joining. Any last minute questions? Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.